We're now halfway through Isaiah's timeline for the last days, and sadly, he's still calling out his covenant people who refuse to follow the prophet. He takes a scroll and writes a word, the longest word in the Bible, Maher Shalal Hashbaz. It means speed to the plunder and hasten to the spoil. It refers to the imminent Assyrian invasion in which Israel, also called Ephraim, would be torn apart by Assyria. A few years later, when this actually happened, Isaiah would be able to say, "See, I told you. Now will you believe me?" Because even after the invasion, he still had much more to say. The problem with God's people at that time was too many of them refused or forsook the waters of Shiloh, meaning the still, peaceful waters of the Holy Covenant. And in our day, too many covenant people place their hope in the arm of flesh, in money, in pleasure, in weapons and physical power. They don't realize that all of these things will be neutralized, that they will amount to nothing when the invasion happens. And the invasion will happen. A modern-day Assyrian king and his army will come up over all his channels and go over all his banks. When the land of Ephraim is sufficiently weakened by sin and natural disaster, the Assyrian army will flood into the breadth of thy land, O Emmanuel. It won't matter how many nations and armies take counsel together against this power. All of that will come to naught. Too many nations have grown weak in the faith of God, which is the only power that can stop this army, which shows no mercy, even on mothers and infants. For nothing can persuade this army to back off. Nothing can buy it off, not gold or silver or even the most cowardly of compromises. The Lord came to Isaiah and literally held his hand and commanded him not to walk in the way of this people. The Lord told him that he was to sanctify the Lord of hosts himself and let him be your fear and let him be your dread. In other words, when all others were dreading the horrific Assyrian invasion, Isaiah was to fear the Lord of hosts, which means, by the way, the Lord of armies. If we have sufficient faith, the Lord of heavenly armies will defend us too. If we have enough faith, he'll literally fight our battles and destroy our enemies, even if necessary, slaying 185,000 in a single night. To the faithful, Christ will be a sanctuary, even a fortress. But to those of the covenant who have lost faith, he'll be a stumbling block and a gin and a snare. And how will Christ become a gin and a snare to those in Israel? His word, through his prophet, will be so counterintuitive to them and ultimately so offensive that many of them will resist it and lose their lives and their souls unless they humble themselves deeply. For, as Isaiah said, they will stumble and fall and be broken and be snared and be taken. This means that many of them will be taken not only by Satan, but also by the overwhelming army invading the land. But the prophet and those with him will wait upon the Lord, even if it happens that at that time the Lord is hiding his face from the house of Jacob. Yes, at this point, halfway through the timeline, the Lord will be hiding his face from those in covenant Israel who have rebelled against him and his prophet. So, if those rebellious people can't find God, who will they look to for guidance? Isaiah says that in their darkened condition, they'll begin to seek out mediums who will speak to the spirits of the dead. And not only will they listen to these spirits, they'll hearken to them and follow their dark and poisonous counsel into submission to Satan himself. And then what'll happen to these people who used to be our fellows in the gospel of Christ? Isaiah says, distressed and hungry, they will roam through the land. When they are famished, they will become enraged, and, looking upward, will curse the king and their God. All of this happened in ancient Israel, just as Isaiah said. But we must never forget that he was speaking to us as well. We must never forget that Nephi included all of this in his book for our day. And he especially included his long block of Isaiah for our guidance as a timeline for us in the last days. If we have eyes to see and ears to hear, we'll be enlightened by the words of Isaiah and forewarned to prepare us for things to come. And what will become of those who hearken not? Isaiah says, "They will look to the land, but there shall be a depressing scene of anguish and gloom, and thus are they banished into outer darkness." And again, at this point, the second half of Isaiah's timeline is still yet to unfold. Will we be prepared? Will we be humble enough to hearken to the Lord's servant when he tells us to do hard things, even strange things, even things pertaining to the law of the celestial kingdom? All of this and more is explained in greater detail in the book, The Words of Isaiah. I'm Curtis Taylor with The Words of Isaiah.